it's really sad because I came on your show, I think,
Mm,
in early June, um, and on a Saturday like this,
mm,
and the problem was really bad then, and it's worse now because very little has been done, unfortunately. As you said, the war in Ukraine, as well as this appalling drought, the worst in 40 years, the worst since the Live Aid era, has led to appalling food insecurity. This part of the world got most of its grain from Russia and Ukraine. That pretty much stopped after the invasion. And a couple of ships have got through to sort of quite large fanfare, but it's not nearly enough. And that's pushed the prices of everything else up, in addition to the fuel price, obviously, because of spikes in global oil prices. People can't afford to feed themselves and feed their children. In northern Kenya, people are feeding their children wild berries that they find. Lots of children have left school so they can work as sort of shoe shines in towns. If you go to Lodwar, and which is the main city in Turkana, there's loads of kids sort of scooting around aimlessly with jugs of water, never being able to fill them. Lots of livestock are dying, as you said. I just got back actually from Samburu County, which is also in northern Kenya, which a lot of your listeners will know about because of Samburu National Reserve, which is a massive tourist destination, or at least was, but it kind of looks like a dusty wasteland now,
mm.
with sort of carcasses all over the place. We found a great big rotting elephant carcass that had been shot in the face because it had gone too close to a village because elephants are raiding towns and villages to try and get food. I spoke to a guy whose house had been raided 5 times by elephants. There's that conflict in Garissa, which is northeastern Kenya, which is near the Somali border, or closer to Somalia. The same thing's happening with giraffes. There's these very vulnerable reticulated giraffes, which are like liver colored and have this quite beautiful white lattice kind of pattern on them. The 40 of them have died in the last few months because they've been going into farmlands and eating mango flowers. They've been shot by farmers and farmhands. So it's really awful. And,
Mm.
northern Kenya is really bad. Somalia is even worse. In 2011, 250,000 Somalis died in the famine then. And this looks a lot worse than that. And, for a long time, certainly, since almost the start of this year, or since the invasion, I suppose, aid agencies, the UN and others have been warning that this is going to be really dire and there's going to be death on an enormous scale, but almost nothing appears to have been done at this point.
Mm. It's interesting, Charlie, because when we describe northern Kenya, immediately I wonder, is there an issue with sort of redistribution, or are there real impacts across the country that means that is impossible?
That's a really good question. It doesn't get the money and attention that other parts of Kenya do. It's not visited really by tourists, certainly in the border areas, near Uganda, South Sudan, on the Somalia side. So they don't get that sort of tourist revenue.
Mm,
And there's a massive problem with flow of weapons in that part of the world, something that politicians haven't been very good at tackling. So there's a lot of insecurity up there too, which makes it harder to, transport grain and other things. Just the other day, actually, there was a cattle raid, saw 8 police officers killed and a bunch of civilians too, in Turkana in northern Kenya, because there are gangs of either tribesmen from the Potok tribe in that area or from South Sudan and Uganda that come into Kenya to try and steal cows because of the insecurity and because of the hunger and the desperation, really.
mm,
So yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, like, the distances are quite large.
mm.
It's not easy to get stuff out there. There's a massive refugee camp, the Kakuma refugee camp, which is the second largest in Kenya. It's absolutely vast. It was built for 70,000 people. It's now got 230,000 people in it. A lot of the aid goes there, but people in the community around there are now turning up at the refugee camp asking for food and water. So it certainly is, I think, is a problem of distribution.
Yeah.
And if there were more tourists there, it would make a difference. The new president's just come in, as you said, William Ruto. He has faced calls to declare a national emergency, try and deal with this hunger crisis. If he does that, perhaps the aid will be better distributed throughout the country if it's a national thing.
Yeah. Charlie, it's really good to speak to you. Thank you very much for the update.
Thanks, Callum.
Thank you. Now, Charlie Mitchell, who is the Times reporter in Kenya, reporting then on particularly northern Kenya, facing its worst drought in 40 years, the hunger crisis there, the insecurities around transportation, making distribution really difficult. And something that really stood out for me, actually, is this picture of elephants and giraffes raiding towns and houses because they are in search of food, which alongside the human suffering is just quite a remarkable thought, actually.